Hello, welcome back to Layman's Perspective, the show where I make predictions about things that turn out to be true. This is going to be another episode breakdown for WandaVision, this time of episode 3. And I'll say again, this is a spoiler review. Don't watch this until you've watched episode 3 for yourself. It'll spoil everything. Also remember, if I end up predicting things that end up being true, kind of like what just happened with this episode, that might be a thing that I do. So you've been warned. Alright, let's go. This episode seems to be modeled mostly after the Brady Bunch, and I say mostly because while the opening credits are certainly reminiscent of that kind of 3x3 facebox Brady Bunch style intro, the song itself sounded, at least to me, like the original intro for the Partridge Family, so maybe they were doing multiple homages. We start with Wanda and Vision getting a pregnancy checkup from a doctor via a house call, which was a very 60s, 70s thing to do. Right from the get-go, Vision seems a lot more logically freaked out about things than Wanda does, probing a lot more into just how she could be so far along in her pregnancy in such a short span of time. Wanda seems more interested in keeping it all a secret and ignoring it, whereas Vision actually seems perturbed by just how illogical the progression of the pregnancy has been. The doctor leaves, saying he's going on a vacation to Bermuda, and while they're outside, Vision beseeches him to keep the pregnancy a secret. No doubt because people will find it strange that she's become pregnant in a day. In fact, there's multiple things about this episode, her pregnancy included, that I'm really surprised the doctor doesn't have a stronger reaction to. As the doctor leaves, we see Vision looking to his left and Herb is outside, buzzsawing into the wall separating their two properties instead of trimming his hedges. Vision makes a passing joke about this, but to me this seemed like another one of those character break glitches, where one of the characters is behaving incorrectly. It's played off for laughs at first, but as he continues to malfunction, Vision's demeanor switches from that of playing along with the sitcom joke to genuinely looking and asking himself, what exactly is going on here? As he comes inside to say to Wanda, the strangest thing just happened outside, again, his attention is diverted away from asking bigger questions, this time because Wanda's pregnancy bump has become even bigger in the time it took him to walk the doctor outside and then come back inside. Once again, like the previous two episodes, the interior of the house seems to have changed to match the decade and show that they are homaging. Paul Bettany's haircut in particular screams 70s to me. You know, the whole episode is in Technicolor now, so that really helps in selling the progression of the decade, but it was his long, wavy haircut that really got me. We have Vision quite literally narrating to us, the audience, that Wanda is nesting as she proceeds to nest. I'm assuming in an attempt to make up for how short a time frame this is all happening in, Wanda seems to be speeding through creating a nursery for the baby, complete with a butterfly mobile and a stork on the wall. It's in this scene that we get our first pregnancy-related reality warp. The baby kicks, and Wanda inadvertently, with her powers, brings all of the butterflies to life that go fluttering around the room. As the episode progresses, you seem to see more and more that her reaction to different pregnancy stimuli causes her to accidentally do things with her powers. Vision deduces from a timeline in a pregnancy book he's reading that Wanda is about 6 months pregnant based on the fact that she's feeling the baby's kick, which is again shocking considering this has all happened, to our eyes at least, within the time frame of a day or two. Believing her at this point to only be pregnant with one child, they have a cute back and forth over whether or not to name the kid Tommy or Billy. When she has twins and they use both names, this obviously comes into play later with Wiccan and Speed, but we'll get to that. I don't want to jump the gun. Vision's inspiration for choosing Billy is also a little interesting here, choosing to name him after William Shakespeare, and quoting, "All the world's a stage, all the men and women merely players." Pretty on the nose thematically, considering what we believe to be going on in the course of this show. Vision does some quick computational algorithms and concludes that at the rate that the pregnancy seems to be progressing, the baby should be due Friday, 3 days from where they are right now. We get a hilarious little moment of Wanda and Vision prepping for parenthood, specifically timing Vision on how quick he can change the baby's diaper. I think Paul Bettany's acting, once again, is fantastic. He really just sells the fatherly yes that he gives. Throughout the episode, we get all kinds of visual gags of Vision doing things really quick, either changing the diaper really fast or flipping through books really fast because he's frantically trying to keep up with all of this. Specifically this time, he identifies that the sensation that Wanda is having are Braxton Hicks contractions. Wanda has a particularly potent Braxton Hicks contraction, I'm going to say, and it causes some weird stuff to start happening around the house with her powers. She ends up knocking out the electricity to her house, and apparently later we see the entirety of the town. And while this is all happening, we get some pretty funny musical cues. As they're fleeing the electronic chaos going on in the kitchen, we get a harpsichord, I believe, playing in the background, which I don't know if this was their intention, but that reminded me of the Addams Family. And then a theremin also kicks in with some very alien UFO music as they're back-to-back afraid of all the different stuff that's happening. I just thought it was very funny. A quick hilarious cut to Phil and Dottie's house shows us that indeed the power has been knocked out for the whole block, if not the greater town at large. In response to accidentally knocking out the power, Wanda asks Vision if their neighbors will start to notice all of their powers which they're constantly trying to hide from them. Using on some of the stranger things that have happened in the past couple of episodes, specifically bringing up that disturbing dinner scene with Mr. and Mrs. Hart from episode 1 and Herb's little malfunction on the wall outside, he, in a very real acting moment, looks Wanda in the eyes and questions, "I think something's wrong here, Wanda." However, there's a super quick and subtle film cut back to right before when Vision started talking, and he starts talking again, but this time with very kitsch sitcom music and very corny, stereotypical dialogue about how we're in uncharted waters and we're pregnant and we're gonna be okay. This seemed to me very similar to the beekeeping scene, and I think it's just another indicator that Wanda has a very large scope of control in here. We obviously see that on much more transparent display a little further down into this episode, but this was the first indication of that in this episode for me. Specifically, it screamed to me that for some reason or another, Wanda does not want Vision to realize that stuff is wrong here and wants him to just accept that everything is fine and everything is normal and just to keep going along with things. This disturbing and then heartfelt double scene is then punctuated by Wanda having a real contraction. They both freak out because Vision's prediction about Friday afternoon was clearly incorrect, although I can't really blame him because I don't know how you make assumptions based on a situation this chaotic. He floats into the air and starts freaking out, and Wanda has to breathe him back down, which is a pretty cute role reversal there. Wanda's water breaks, causing it to literally start raining inside of the house, which is just another example of the exponential growth of her accidental power usage. We then cut to our third ad in the show. Now, they've all had little subliminal messages, but to me, this one was the most conspicuous of the three. The ad asks a visibly flustered and stressed out housewife, "Do you need a break?" and proceeds to tell her, "Come with me, escape to a world all your own, where your problems float away. When you want to get away, but you don't want to go anywhere, Hydra Soak, find the goddess within." And I waved that away because that was the obvious entity reference that all of these ads seem to have. Hydra Soak, okay, Hydra's involved. I'm more interested in that ad tagline, though, because it makes a lot of sense in the context of thinking that Wanda is trying to escape traumatic events by creating a bubbled reality. That's pretty much an explanation of what could be going on here. We cut back to them hiding under the table, trying to not get wet by Wanda's water breaking. It stops and she blow dries the entire house, herself and Vision, with her powers. Vision, slightly panicking, speeds out the door to go get the doctor before he leaves for his Bermuda trip and leaves Wanda alone. As her contractions intensify, we hear a noise coming from the nursery that she had just made. The doorbell rings, and before we have time to go investigate what might be inside the room, Wanda goes to open the door and sees that Geraldine is here. Attempting to hide her sudden 9-month early pregnancy, she puts on a large overcoat and opens the door. Geraldine coming over because all of the pipes in her ceiling seem to have burst because of one of Wanda's earlier reality alterations. We're then treated to a funny sequence of scenes of Geraldine just trying to stay and make small talk, with Wanda trying to hide all of the changes she's inadvertently making with her contraction power spikes. Just as she's about to leave, she sits down on the couch and starts filling in Wanda about some arbitrary story about a workplace mishap that she has. And while this is going on, And also, while Wanda is trying to conceal the fact that she's in labor, we see that the stork that Wanda had painted on the wall earlier has now come to life, much the same way that the butterflies had earlier in the episode. Meaning that the stork was the noise that we heard coming from the nursery before Geraldine came in. And then this leads to a couple of funny scenes of Wanda trying to get rid of the stork and distract Geraldine from seeing it to not reveal her powers. Once or twice, she tries to make the stork physically disappear in a poof of red smoke that I identified as similar to the red poof effects from the original Wizard of Oz movie. However, nothing works. And while I seem to be believing more and more that Wanda has a large degree of control in this reality, I think that this was an indicator that she doesn't have total control. Twice she tries to make the stork disappear, and twice it doesn't work. To me, that says that she's not the only one doing this. I think after this episode, especially with what happens later, it's pretty apparent that Wanda is at least doing some, if not most, of what's going on. But I think the stork and a couple of other things that we've seen so far are an indicator that there are still other forces at play as well. They go into the nursery, and Geraldine finally sees that there is a crib. At the exact same time, Wanda is unable to keep her labor hidden for any longer, has a large contraction, and tells Geraldine that the baby is coming. They then go into the living room to have an impromptu home delivery, with Geraldine surprisingly not being that shaken by the fact that she just realized Wanda is in labor, not even that she's pregnant. We then cut to Vision getting the doctor before he leaves for Bermuda. What was interesting to me in this scene is that Vision doesn't try to conceal his powers at all. He superhero runs right up to the doctor, grabs him, puts him on his back, and runs right back to the house. Now, I'm sure this was because he was panicking, given the fact that his wife was going into labor. I'm just more curious as to why the secrecy was dropped, and also why the doctor for the rest of the episode doesn't really seem to react to the fact that he saw Vision's powers, and later the fact that he delivers Wanda's babies after previously telling her that she was only 4 months pregnant. We cut back to the living room, and Geraldine is doing her best to help Wanda deliver the babies. Despite the fact that there is a still steady exponential rise in the intensity of the contractions and the craziness of the shit Wanda's doing all around the house. Now, later on in the episode, the show brings this to our attention, but in this specific scene, I paused it and noticed that there is a sword logo on the pendant of Geraldine's person. This, combined with what we see at the end of the episode, to me seems a pretty strong indicator that she is in fact a sword agent. Now, I didn't flat out assert that I believe this was going to be the case, but I did bring it up in my previous breakdown, so I'm going to count that as a half win for a correct prediction. Just as Vision and the Doctor get back to the house, Wanda and Geraldine have successfully delivered the first kid. Geraldine and the Doctor conveniently scoot into another room so that Vision can drop his disguise and meet the baby with his real face. Just as he gets close to Wanda to appreciate the family moment that we're having, it's cut in half by Wanda screaming again, and we realize that she is going to give birth to a second kid. For those of us who saw Wiccan and Speed coming all along, it was logical to assume they were going to be twins. I just love the comedy of punctuating the nice, sweet moment with just another pregnancy scream. With both babies now successfully delivered, Vision goes to walk the Doctor out of the house. And we get an interesting little bit of dialogue here. He asks the Doc if he's still going to go to Bermuda. Dr. Nielsen responds, "I don't think we'll go after all. Small towns, you know, so hard to escape." The use of the word escape here, I think, was deliberate and is very important. The laugh track cuts in as if this were a joke, but the camera push-in on Vision's confused and slightly disturbed face says otherwise. As he turns to his right, we see Agnes and Herb colluding, for lack of a better word, by the wall. Now, I went and replayed this scene with the subtitles on so I could see if anything was being said in the whispers, and it says that Agnes says, "What was she doing in there? Did you see her go inside? Did Geraldine ... And then it's at that point that Vision gets close enough that they have to stop talking about whatever they're talking about. He approaches them and asks them about their power, and also just because he seems a little curious of what exactly they're talking about, with a look of suspicion on his face, turns to go back into the house to tend to Wanda, and Agnes calls him back, asking, "Is Geraldine in there with Wanda by themselves. As this is happening, we simultaneously follow the conversation that Geraldine and Wanda are having inside the house, where Geraldine says, "Can you believe it, twins?" We see Wanda get a look of, I'm going to say, recollection on her face as she remembers that she herself was in fact a twin. She remembers the fact that she had a brother, and for just a tiny moment when she says his name, Pietro, she slips a tiny bit back into her Eastern European Sokovian accent. She then starts to sing a lullaby to the babies in Sokovian, again as confirmed by the subtitles. As she's singing, we push in on Geraldine, and again we get one of those, what I'm going to keep calling, character breaks, as she herself seems to be trying to recall something, either to do or to say. The acting from both of these actresses in this scene is superb. Geraldine / Monica, I guess we could start calling her at this point, with an absolute air of seriousness on her face, asks, "He was killed by Ultron, wasn't he?" Wanda, in a very dreamlike state, immediately snaps her attention to Geraldine at the mention of the word Ultron. We flip back to Vision outside with Agnes and Herb, where they're telling him that she's new in town and that they seem to be suspicious of her, saying that she's got no family and no home. We flip back again to Wanda and Geraldine, and Wanda seems to have been quite triggered by the mention of Ultron killing her brother. She presses Geraldine, "What did you just say? What did you just say?" She tries to reel back into an area of conversational safety, reminding Wanda that she previously had mentioned, "You're such a strong lady, you're gonna make me see it again." But Wanda's not falling for it. Wanda asks Geraldine to leave, as we see Geraldine trying more and more to recover the situation back into her control. We see Wanda's focus goes right to her necklace with the sword logo that I mentioned earlier, and just as she does that, we hear the babies in the background start to cry. We then flip back again to Vision talking to Agnes and Herb. Herb really starts to unravel here, saying that Geraldine came here because we're all ... Vision says, "Because we're all what? What are you trying to tell me?" And before Herb can finish his sentence, we flip back to Wanda talking to Geraldine again. I know, we're doing a real flip-flop back and forth thing here. Wanda flat out asks Geraldine about the sword pendant necklace that she's wearing. So now the episode has officially brought that symbol to our attention. I just wanted to let you guys know that I spotted it a couple of minutes prior in the birth scene. Her suspicion for that symbol is not unfounded, seeing as how she definitely saw it and wondered what it was when she found the toy helicopter with the same logo. You could even make the case that she saw the sword logo on the back of the beekeeper who was crawling out of the sewer. So there's definitely the case that she is, for one reason or another, suspicious of that symbol and what it means. Geraldine's composure completely falling apart at this point. Wanda asks, "What is that symbol? Who are you?" Geraldine is just stuttering at a loss for words at this point, while the babies crying in the background continue to get louder. We cut back to Vision talking to Agnes and Herb, and right before Herb can finish the sentence, "She came here because we're all..." Agnes whips around and says, "Stop it." Now, you guys all know that I found that dinner scene in episode 1 immensely disturbing. To me, this seemed to connect those two scenes, because Mrs. Hart was saying the same thing to Mr. Hart in that scene. Stop it. If we are to believe that Agnes is indeed Agatha Harkness, the witch character from the comics, then my guess would be that she's now not the only witch. We can believe and assert that Wanda is the main force creating this reality, this fallacy. But I think it's also fair to guess that there are people / entities that want to encourage her to believe this fake universe that she's created, like someone enabling a drug user, almost. Now I'm going to make the guess that perhaps Mrs. Hart is implicated in the same way, as in maybe there's more than one witch in this setting. I could be wrong, but that seemed a pretty blatant connection between those two scenes. We flip back to Wanda and Geraldine, and Wanda looks dangerous at this point, almost murderous, as she advances towards Geraldine, continuously pressing, "Who are you? Who are you?" Geraldine's completely lost for words. She's stuttering, she's flustered, she has no idea what to say. We cut back outside one more time, and Agnes and Herb promptly leave after Agnes reestablishes control over Herb, is what I'm going to say at this point. Vision, clearly confused by whatever he just saw, goes back inside to tell Wanda what just happened. As he goes back inside, he asks where Geraldine is, because now she's gone. And at this point, now Wanda's starting to make me feel unsettled, in a way that some of the ancillary characters have so far. The look on her face, I have no other word for it, was psychotic. She looked insane and quite sinister when she said she had to run, she went home. Now that in and of itself was quite disturbing, but a friend of mine also brought it to my attention that this could have been a seed planted for a future conflict. Remember, Vision was just told by Agnes and Herb that Geraldine has no family, has no husband, and has no home. And Wanda doesn't know that Vision's been given that information. So now this raises the question, is this going to plant a seed of mistrust/suspicion between Wanda and Viz? The aspect ratio of the shot then changes, going from the horizontal TV to the vertical widescreen, and we cut to an outside perspective of Westview, seemingly now in the real world. After a couple of seconds of silence, an area in the sky seems to fizzle and warp, and Geraldine gets ejected. If you slow it down, you can clearly see Wanda's red energy all over her body as she gets shoved out of the reality. This being the strongest indicator to me so far that Wanda does have a large degree of control over what's happening here. Again, a friend brought this to my attention. It's interesting to note that on the inside of this little bubble reality, it was daytime, but on the outside, in the real world, it's nighttime. I didn't catch that until someone brought it to my attention. Just another further demarcation between the real world and the fake world. It's also interesting to note that as she gets ejected, her 70s era clothing does not disappear or revert back to whatever she was wearing before she entered into the reality. I think that bodes well for the future, considering that we need to speculate on whether or not Vision and the kids are going to survive this entire story. Geraldine/Monica is then approached by a flurry of cars and helicopters and men in uniform as an echoey rendition of Daydream Believer by the Monkees plays. Being the eagle-eyed freak that I am, paused that scene when it was a sweeping shot of all the cars, and I did notice that there is a single sword logo on one of the doors of the SUVs. So this is Sword rescuing her / attempting to see what the hell just happened to Monica. I watched this scene back a couple of times, and that background base to me definitely had some aesthetic similarities in my mind to the base that S.H.I.E.L.D. built up around the impact of Mjolnir in the desert in the first Thor movie. And the final shot that we're treated to as the camera pulls all the way out is in the right-hand corner. We see a field or a wall of some kind flanked by floodlights. If you've ever seen the movie Annihilation, to me this looked very strikingly similar to the aesthetic the director chose for the border of the shimmer. I think it confirms my biggest prediction from the previous 2 episodes, in that this is happening in a physical space. As we see Geraldine, I really have to stop calling her Geraldine. As we see Monica getting ejected from the reality, the universe, we can see that there are actual physical houses and a water tower beyond the sign that says Westview. I think this plus the physical border field wall thing that we see, to me, is a pretty strong indicator that this is a real town with real people who have gotten warped and affected by the greater goings-on of this storyline. I also think that it definitely could lend some support to my theory from episode 2, wherein if things go past that field, they change. I think, again, that color helicopter that Wanda finds in the bush may very well have been a real helicopter that flew through that border and got changed as per the rules / magic of the inside of the bubble. All right, let's break this down. This episode was pretty good. We got a lot of stuff, and I really can't wait to see how much things advance in the next episode. The big thing for me was Tommy and Billy, aka Thomas Shepard and William Kaplan, aka Wiccan and Speed. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. Reason number 1, if they plan to do a Young Avengers movie or Young Avengers series or anything of that nature, this is 2 more names that they've added to the roster, along with Lila Barton, the daughter of Hawkeye, Cassie Lang, the daughter of Ant-Man, Morgan Stark, the daughter of Tony. They're slowly accruing a cast of kids in the background that they could easily use to film a Young Avengers property of some kind. Number 2, Wiccan and Speed are pretty important to the comics in terms of LGBTQ representation. Wiccan is gay and Speed is bi. This is obviously important for representation. You know, the MCU hasn't really had any LGBTQ representation in its characters so far, and Wiccan is probably one of the most popular gay Marvel characters that I can think of. So for that reason, it's definitely important. Number 3, Wiccan specifically is very powerful. And in the future of the MCU, there's many roles he can play. He pals around with Loki and Doctor Strange constantly, him being a magic wielder himself, and I believe in certain storylines is the one who becomes the Sorcerer Supreme after Stephen Strange for a variety of complicated reasons. So it's safe to say that the characters Wiccan specifically have some big futures ahead of them in the MCU. Number 4, if they are actually emulating the House of M comic, Wiccan and Speed are integral tie-ins to the breaking of Wanda's sanity later in that story. If that's what they're doing, that not only means that Agnes could very well be Agatha Harkness, but it could also mean that they're introducing Mephisto into the MCU, which is essentially Marvel's version of Satan, to simplify things. If you want to know more about the House of M storyline as well as Mephisto, I can leave a couple of links in the description to some very useful watching material that can get you up to speed on things. Get it? Speed? 2 things I have yet to cover yet. I think it's logical to assume at this point that the people, the poor people, of whatever town this is, are being controlled. And I think that if Agnes is the one controlling them, it's telling that both Agnes and Herb have a suspicious bias against Geraldine. I think that means that for whatever reason, the people who are enabling Wanda do not want Sword or anyone else to come in and try and pull her out. Most likely in the pursuit of Wanda and Vision birthing and rearing Tommy and Billy for a variety of reasons that will undoubtedly be told to us later on. 2, the symbol on Agnes's necklace. Now, I'm actually pretty ashamed of myself because I didn't notice this symbol has occurred in all 3 episodes. I'm a little stumped with this one because they haven't let us get a very detailed look at what exactly is on the necklace. I had one friend of mine suggesting that it was an ancient Greek symbol for an actual Hydra. I had another friend suggest that it was one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I believe specifically that either pestilence or death is the white horse, considering that it was a white symbol on the brooch. All in all, I think this was a great episode. We were given a lot of answers, and concurrently, they raised a lot more questions. So I'm really excited to see how many more answers we get in episode 4 and how many more questions that then raises to look forward to episode 5. If you liked and found informative the stuff that we talked about in this episode today, please give me a like and consider subscribing. Also, again, if you have a friend or a couple of friends who want to be up to speed on WandaVision without watching the rest of the MCU, which is not something I suggest, send them these videos. It'll probably help them understand some of what's going on. Also, if you think I missed anything, feel free to mention it in the comments and I will include it in next week's breakdown. I'll see you guys next week for episode 4.